All right, it looks like we are at the top of the hour. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the Ethical Issues of FASD webinar, sponsored by the Frontier Regional FASD Training Center, which is funded by a grant from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. I will be going over a few housekeeping announcements before we begin today's training. Please refer to the notes box on the right-hand side of your page to see important announcements from me, Carolyn, the moderator. I will be addressing questions related to technical difficulties there, and I've already posted some information about audio help if you are experiencing audio issues. Participants will be muted during today's webinar. If you wish to ask the presenters a question, please use the chat box in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. You can also use this box to communicate and chat with other participants. Next to the chat box is the web links box. We have included some resources in this box along with the webinar evaluation. You may navigate to the linked website by clicking on the website name and then press the Browse To button. As we talk about resources during the webinar, I will add them to the web links box. Finally, if you did not pre-register for today's training, you will not be receiving a certificate of completion. You should know if you pre-registered because you should have filled out the online registration form and received a confirmation email. If you haven't registered, please email me and I will send you the registration link, and you'll find my email address in the notes box. Now I'm going to turn the presentation over to our first presenter, Dr. Mahasan Saleh.
Welcome, everybody. We're so happy that you have joined us today to discuss this very important topic. We will be on the webinar for about an hour and a half, and we will take a few breaks to respond to questions. And at the same time, we will need to watch the time, but please do take advantage of the chat box, as Carolyn had mentioned. Again, my name is Dr. Mahasan Saleh, and I'm just very pleased to be here with you on behalf of the Frontier Regional FASD Training Center. I would like to give you a warm welcome again. And I'd like to also introduce my co-presenters, Dr. Ruth Gerritsen-McCain and Dr. Chris Jesfield. Again, we'll be talking today about ethical issues of fetal alcohol spectrum disorders and the helping professional. We'll first start off with a polling question. And we are not face-to-face today, obviously, and so we want to get a sense for who is on the call today. And so Carolyn will go ahead and put up our first polling question. And if you'll take just a minute, there it is, it should be just in the middle of your screen, to go ahead and type your answer. And the question is, what position do you hold at your agency or private practice? And just let us know, and then Carolyn will broadcast the results in just a minute. Okay, so we'll just, if you'll keep, okay, great. So it looks like we've got, oh good, Carolyn's broadcast results, and so I'll just read a few of them. Social services worker, DCFS, clinical supervisor, mental health counselor, developmental disabilities team leader, staff RN public health, educational specialist. So this is wonderful. I won't read all of them, but again, you can just go ahead and scroll through, and it's wonderful to have a variety of professionals with us today. Move on. Oh, good. And in our chat box, I'm both responding there as well. And we'll go ahead and move on to our second polling question. And Karen, if you'll watch that for us, I'll move to our second polling question. And that polling question is, did you participate in the introduction to the FASD webinar on January 30th, 2013 or March 28th, 2013? Okay. The reason why we're asking this question is we know that maybe not everybody had the opportunity to participate in that introduction to FASD webinar, and we'd love to encourage you to do so. It will give you a lot of background information. There are some folks that already have that very solid base in what FASDs are, and work with people on a daily basis in that arena. So they may not watch that, but we do encourage you, even if you need a refresher, to watch it. It's available, and it has been taped, and there are links to that training in your web links box, and Carolyn can also direct you to more information as well. So it looks like, we have a majority of people that did not watch it, 67%, about 21 folks, and then about 32% or 10 folks watch it. So again, we'll just really encourage you to watch that. Okay. Okay, I am seeing in the chat box that there's a lot of static difficulty here, so I'm just going to try and readjust my phone and turn it up a little bit and see if that helps. So if you could let me know. Okay. Okay, we'll just move on to the next slide. And these are actually, it's a little bit of a review of prior learning. Oh, good. Okay, I just see that the choppiness seems to be better now, and the sound is better now. So thank you for letting me know. I just turned up my sound. So anyway, going back to this slide, we'll just review a few of the prior learning goals and outcomes to the Introduction to the FASDs webinar that was held both in January and in March. And during that webinar, Ryan Tollitz and me covered defining the terminology related to FAS and FASDs and described the prevalence and costs associated with FASDs, and also list the effects of alcohol during the critical periods of embryonic and fetal development, and also discussing the fetal alcohol exposure and its impact on young children. So again, feel free to watch this webinar on your own time, but we would encourage you, if you haven't had a chance to watch it. We will review a few of these points, although that's not our main focus today, but we will in a few minutes cover a few of these things. And for today, our main goals and outcomes are to identify ethical issues related to FASDs, to identify ethical principles in relation to FASDs, and to describe basic ethical principles for providers, and recognize patient confidentiality in relation to FASDs. And our next slide is yet another polling question. And if Carolyn, you'll launch that for us. This is more of a review question, again, based on the earlier presentation. And if you'll this is a good true or false question. So true or false, fetal alcohol spectrum disorders is an umbrella term describing a continuum of permanent birth defects caused by maternal consumption of alcohol during pregnancy. FAS, fetal alcohol syndrome, falls under the FASD and umbrella. So I'll go ahead and look at the votes. Oh, excellent. Okay, it looks like we have 100% of the folks that responded, or 31 folks. Oh, well, that's okay. Most of the folks, I see the numbers changed just a little bit, but most of the folks responded as that is true, and it is the correct answer. This is the statement that I just read is true. Okay. In terms of reviewing, we'll just move on. One of the important things to be aware of are the prevalence and costs of FAS and FASD. And so if you just look at this comparison slide, we see that the cost of FAS to our society in America is about $2 million per person. And in terms of 1.2 to 1.5 cases per 1,000 births, which translates to about 1,000 to 6,000 alcohol-affected births per year. Then if we look at FASD, we see that that's about 9 to 10 cases per 1,000 births, which translates to about 40,000 alcohol-affected births per year. And then in comparison, the estimated lifetime cost per individual is about 1.4 to 1.5 million. We need to keep in mind, too, just that has been some research in terms of comparisons, and we have the CDC reports that 13 of every 10,000 babies born in the U.S. Each year are born with Down syndrome. And then in the 2002, the CDC reported that the autism spectrum disorder in the U.S. was 6.6 per 1,000 8-year-olds, or 1 in 150 cases. So I will move on just to the next slide, and then I will turn, after this next slide, I will turn the time over to Dr. Ruth Garrett McCain. Okay. So this slide, if you'll just look at, I'm getting some notes that it's a few folks to hear. Okay, so let me just turn up my phone. I apologize. Let me move my phone a little bit here. This slide, if you'll just look at the concentric circle, and if you see the child with an FASD is embedded in the larger context of family and social factors, as suggested in this diagram, the mother's attitude and behaviors about the use of alcohol are embedded in the larger social network. And as expected, her social network and unique cultural background can have an influence on her behaviors. And some such networks may strongly discourage alcohol consumption, while others may permit or even encourage alcohol consumption. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to Ruth, and if we need to have somebody go over that material again, we can do that if for folks that couldn't hear that.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you're at. Can everyone hear me okay? I'll wait for a few responses. Great. Okay, I know that we're phoning in from all over, and so it does make it a challenge, but we're certainly going to try our best, and we appreciate your feedback that lets us know if it's choppy, or so that we can try to make that okay. I just wanted to spend a moment regarding a society with discomfort. Our society deals with the issue of drinking during pregnancy in various ways, as we all know. Research findings even continue to battle the issue. Popular media via television and other social medias continue the argument as well. What we're going to do now is take a few moments and, well, actually it's about 11 minutes, and there are 3 videos that Carolyn will be managing for us, but that kind of take a look at this battle that's going on and how it's viewed. So Carolyn, if you wouldn't mind, we'll watch those videos.
All right, and for those of you who have a slow internet connection, the videos may not come in very clearly, but I will include the links to the videos in the web links box so you can watch those on your own time. And just a friendly reminder to the presenters, please mute yourself.
Healthy living now, and a new study about drinking and pregnancy that's creating a firestorm tonight. In this country, pregnant women have long heard that if you consume any alcohol at all, you risk harming your developing child. But today, a brand new study challenges that belief. It said 8 drinks a week may not be a problem. It started a big argument, and here's ABC's Amy Robach.
Down the hatch.
It's an uncomfortable scene, watching a pregnant woman drink in a bar.
When you get a chance, I'll take a tequila.
This woman is an actress playing a part for ABC's What Would You Do with John Quinones. She's not really pregnant, just pretending to be.
Baby really starts to kick.
And it looks like she's drinking hard alcohol heavily.
Look, I know I'm not supposed to know, but I do, and I am so excited for you.
Well, what's going on?
Monica's pregnant.
Oh, my God. Is that why you guys had to get married?
Guys, I'm not pregnant. Mom, why'd you tell the guys that you weren't pregnant? Because I'm not?
We found your test in the trash. If you're not pregnant... It's because I am.
Oh, my God.
Oh, thank you for doing that. I just can't deal with this just quite yet.
So instead, you told me Monica was pregnant?
You said that she was. I just didn't disagree with you.
Sneaky.
Yeah.
Smile, ladies.
So, you ready to talk about it?
No.
Now?
No.
Okay, we'll talk about something else then. Who's the father?
Look, you know what? I haven't told him yet, so until I do, I don't think I should tell anybody else.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fair. Is it Tag?
Oh, baby.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll stop. Okay. Is it Ross? It's Ross, isn't it? Oh, my God, it's Joey.
Honey, stop it, okay? I'm not going to tell you until I tell him.
Uh-huh. At least we know it's a him.
Can you believe Phoebe got pregnant?
Oh, you know what, honey? Let's not talk about that right now.
This is so huge.
Sure, but come on, as big as your wedding.
Of course not. Nothing is. Wow. Between me and you?
Yeah.
In this day and age, how dumb do you have to be to get pregnant?
Hey, you know, sometimes you can do everything right. Everyone can wear everything they're supposed to wear, and one of those little guys just gets through. How? I don't know. Maybe they have tools.
Well, I talked to her, and she's definitely going to have this baby. You know, she said she's going to raise it on her own.
Well, maybe that's really brave.
Maybe. I just hope she realizes how hard it's going to be.
Maybe she hasn't really thought it through that much.
Well, there's a lot to think about. I mean, how is she going to handle this financially? How is she going to juggle work? Does she realize she's not going to have a date again for the next, 18 years?
I don't know.
Are you okay?
Mm-hmm. I'm just thinking about Phoebe. Poor knocked up Phoebe.
Champagne?
Oh, yes, thank you very much. Oh, that's actually how the French drink it.
Well, just got off the phone with my lover, James Brolin.
Oh, really?
Yes, and apparently he is married to some singer. But he said he would leave her for me. And I said, James Brolin, are you sure? James Brolin said,
Rachel's really the one who's pregnant?
what? Why bother?
How do you feel? I don't know. I don't know how I feel. This is all happening so fast. I have to make all these decisions that I don't want to make. Oh, someone just take this away from me.
Calm down. Maybe you're not pregnant.
What?
When I got pregnant with the triplets, I took that test 3 times just to make sure.
Yes, maybe it's a false positive. Are you sure you peed on the stick right?
How many ways are there to do that?
I'm just saying, don't freak out until you're 100% sure.
All right, I'll take it again when I get home. I can wait until then. Wow, this is such a good party. How late does it go till?
Rachel, you gotta take it now.
Oh, this is your wedding.
No, you're not gonna be able to have fun until we know. Come on, do it as a present to me.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I'll run out and get you one.
Oh, the girls are so great.
Oh, wait a minute. Who's the father?
Oh, no, she won't tell us.
Oh, come on, it's my wedding. That could be my present.
Wait, hey, I just gave you peeing on a stick.
See, this is why you register.
How much longer?
30 seconds.
Did I miss it? Rachel, I want you to know that if it's positive, we're gonna...
Oh, I know.
You do.
It's time.
Oh,
No!
go ahead, Rach.
Oh, wait, you know what? I can't look at it. I can't look at it. Somebody else tell me. Somebody tell me. Okay. Okay. It's negative. What? It's negative. Oh. Oh. Well, there you go. Phew. That's great. That is really great news. You know, because the whole not being ready and kind of the financial aspects, all that. Wow, this is so just the way this was supposed to be. Well, then great. Mm-hmm. It's, God, this is so stupid. How can I be upset over something I never had? It's negative. No, it's positive. What? It's not negative, it's positive. Are you sure? Well, yeah, I lied before. God. Now you know how you really feel about it. Oh, that's a risky little game. Are you really gonna do this? Yeah. I'm gonna have a baby. I'm gonna have a baby. I'm gonna have a baby! With who? Oh, it's still not the time.
Dr. Sonia's great. Whenever you ask her if you can have something, she's like,
just a little bit.
Wait, Dr. Sonia doesn't let you have sushi, does she?
Just a little bit.
You're allowed to have Cheetos?
Cheetos. Just a little bit.
Thank you, Carolyn, for facilitating those videos. And yes, I do use a lot of YouTube videos in my presentations and in coursework as well. I'd like to take a couple of moments and reflect on the videos that we saw. It's interesting when we think about the Friends video and then we think about the How I Met Your Mother video. As we know, the Friends season, I believe, concluded in the 1990s. Is that right, everyone? All you Friends fans out there? And yet there was a real social consciousness of one should not be drinking while pregnant. In the How I Met Your Mother video, this caused quite a national uproar from those of us who are concerned about pregnant women drinking, in that little clip, even though it was taken out, she asks if she can drink alcohol, and the doctor says, just a little bit. It was astonishing to me that in 2012, I believe it was, that we would be saying that it's okay to do that, which just continues to show that there are just so many different ideas. And I did find it interesting, the What Would You Do video. If you saw a pregnant woman drinking in a bar, would you do anything? I mean, those are those kinds of moral and ethical dilemmas that we all deal with. I was doing a presentation in Kumasi, Ghana last fall, and I was doing this similar presentation specific to FASD. And I asked folks there, what was the attitude about drinking while pregnant? Again, some of those social norms and deals and it was interesting in the fact that the bigger issue was, from the students that I was speaking with, that the bigger issue would be the mother having a child that had handicaps, that was considered very shameful, and that would be an approach, or a friend, if she knew a friend was pregnant and was drinking alcohol, that the approach there would be to remind her of, if something happened to her child, how she would be shamed in society. And so again, even globally, as we think about things globally, there's just all of these challenges on how do we get the message across given this issue. I'm going to turn the time now back over to Mahasan.
Thank you, Ruth. I'm moving on to the next slide, and we need to remember that alcohol is a solvent, and it does damage the fetus. If you'll just take a minute to look at this slide, and we'll just review that alcohol interferes with the normal proliferation of nerve cells. It alters the ability of brain cells to produce or regulate cell growth, division, and survival. And it also alters expression of certain genes. And it alters the pathways of biochemical or electrical signals within the cells. This is important to remember. We've got one more review slide that we will just ask people. It's actually a polling question, and so I'll ask Carolyn to launch the polling question for us. We'll go ahead and read that. So what constitutes a standard drink? So if you could go ahead and look at the answers here and just chime in whether it's A, B, or C. Okay. Okay. So we'll just take another minute here, another 30 seconds. Okay, the correct answer is actually B, 5 ounces of wine, 12 ounces of beer, 1.5 ounces of hard alcohol. And why are we actually asking this question? It is something that was covered in the FASD basic course, and it is really the screening and brief intervention, awareness, and being on the same page when we're interacting with women and finding out how much they drink. And so being aware of what is a standard drink and how much they drink. Okay, so thanks everyone for participating in that question. We'll move on here to look at a very important slide here. And despite what society says, that research has shown that there is no safe type, no safe known amount, and no safe time to drink during pregnancy. Unfortunately, doctors used to tell pregnant women it was okay to drink a little during pregnancy to prevent preterm labor. And so one of the goals of the CDC's Frontier Regional Training Center is to get the FASD Regional Training Center is to get the message out that all professionals need to have accurate information and to be passing along accurate information about FASDs, because unfortunately some professionals are still passing along misinformation and do not have accurate information about alcohol consumption during pregnancy. So I'd like to take the time now to go ahead and we'll move over to Chris, and he'll start talking about ethical issues.
Good morning or good afternoon. My name is Chris Jesfield from the University of North Dakota, and I'm going to take this portion, the beginning half an hour. We've looked at some of the basic concept and terminology of FASD, and now we're going to look a little bit more at the ethical components in terms of working with pregnant women or drinking. And so as we think about ethical issues, I think a nice way of thinking about them is principles to help us lead us down a particular road. Unfortunately, the road sign is rarely this obvious, that there's an obvious way to intervene. And so obviously we need to take many of these ethics under consideration as we make specific decision making. So to organize our last part today, we're going to first look at biomedical ethics and some specific concepts that can help us think about our work with pregnant women who are drinking. We will also talk a little bit, Ruth will be talking about confidentiality and its role and importance in working with these women. We're going to consider an ethical framework which we can use these ethics to inform our practice. And then we're going to look at a case study today just to get us to facilitate conversation and thinking about how these different ethical principles might be applied to a specific case study. So first, in terms of ethical decision-making and making a decision with the client in front of you, we have to first, Anderson in their paper talk about determining the facts of the specific case in front of you, analyzing and figuring out what are the ethical aspects or principles that are at odds or that are at play in the scenario. We then make a decision based on analysis of those principles and considerations. We take action, and then we evaluate the decision. And obviously, when we think about ethics and ethical principles, having conversations with other healthcare professionals becomes paramount. We'll talk about a little bit how these ethics also intersect with different people's professions, and we have a number based on that first polling question, a number of different professionals here today with us. So we're going to talk about 4 basic principles from this Hallmark book, Principles of Biomedical Ethics. It's on a 2nd edition, I think, a couple years ago. The first one we're going to talk about, and I also, during this conversation, want you to think about your own professional ethical codes. Many of these may be reflected, these biomedical ethics, in your own professional code as well. So this first one, autonomy. As a social worker, we often talk about this concept of self-determination, and that's certainly at play with this principle. And this is where we consider an individual's right to self-determination, and we try to consider what is their capacity for making an autonomous choice. And so at play here is thinking about their ability to reason, their ability to make a voluntary choice. We know that autonomy, we have a different ethical conversation about autonomy. We talk about children or adolescents than we do adults. And that gets into defining, again, what adulthood and childhood is. So it's these are the kinds of conversations at play with this particular principle of autonomy. The final question here related to autonomy, does alcohol, the question here in terms of we think about alcohol abuse and alcohol dependence is, does alcohol dependence affect autonomy? So how does alcohol affect an individual's decision-making? To what degree does a diagnosis or a more severe alcohol problem indicate difficulty in reasoning? So that is all of the things at play in terms of this principle of autonomy. So can this person make a decision on their own, and do they have the ability to reason, make a voluntary choice? And with FASD in particular, how does alcohol affect that particular decision? And in this case, to care for their pregnancy. The next basic principle we're going to talk about is beneficence. And this is the concept of how healthcare professionals ask us this, how we seek the benefit of our patients and our clients. This is often the goal of many helping professions. Maybe it's a very obvious goal with a sense of the adjective helping. But here we consider how do we care for the well-being of the woman consuming alcohol. And another conversation here is what is our care to, in this case, the fetus, in terms of the helping professional. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but certainly state laws concerning personhood that whole debate is certainly present right now all across the country about who are we seeking the benefit for, the mother and the fetus. How are those conversations take place in a legal framework and an ethical framework? The last part here is we also, with FASD, or fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, we consider our own professional care for those affected by fetal alcohol spectrum disorders as they grow. So whether it be an adolescent with a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder or a toddler, and what is the care that helping professionals provide to that individual. Non-malfeasance is the third ethical principle I'm going to talk about. And this is where we consider the responsibility to avoid causing harm. And how do we minimize undue harm to others? So in a basic way, this is a principle that helps us consider weighing what are the benefits, but also what are the risks, and what risks are too high for a particular individual. So if we say that if a certain person is going to need to have mandatory treatment of some kind, are there certain risks to that to other individuals in that person's life? And in this case, I was talking about in the previous slide, how might the fetus be considered in terms of minimizing risks or harm? Trying to look a little bit at some of the chat box, trying to I can keep up with some of these while I'm talking. The fourth basic principle is justice. And this is something certainly that social work profession thinks a lot about in terms of this particular principle. And this is the fair distribution of social benefits and burdens, and to promote and follow laws and practices in ways that are fair for all people. So some of my work up here in North Dakota as a teacher here looks at some of the access issues that rural individuals can face often in places, and access to treatment. And so if we think about treatment for individuals, for pregnant women drinking, how can we be fair? Do they have the similar access, and do they have a fair distribution of access to treatment services? Also, we consider in terms of are our laws fair to clients that have fetal alcohol spectrum disorders themselves? Another question this brings up is, can we be non-prejudicial to women who are knowingly using alcohol and abuse alcohol in pregnancy? And this is kind of what I started with, but thinking about equal access or some access to alcohol treatment services. So this conversation about justice can get us to think about what is the distribution of both treatment services and access, and what are our own abilities to meet all women, all pregnant women, in terms of meeting their specific needs. So we have our next polling question here before we move on. And this really does concern itself with something I talked about in the previous slide. So from 1 to 5, how non-judgmental do you think you are or could be toward a woman who is drinking during a pregnancy? And so 5 would be you think that you would be non-judgmental. 1 is you would admit to or judgmental towards a woman who is drinking during their pregnancy. So these are these self-reflective exercises we should certainly take on as helping professionals and consider these. And Carolyn's saying, these are anonymous, so I have no idea who you are as in terms of the 1 to 5 here. So, okay. So I think, Carolyn, you can, maybe you are making them public, I'm sorry. So let me view them here. Oops. Okay, so obviously there's quite a range here from 1 to 5 with various people on today's call saying, you know, they're in very different places concerning how judgmental they might feel in terms of working with a pregnant woman who is knowingly drinking alcohol. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to give it back to Ruth here, and she's going to talk a little bit about confidentiality and some of the differences and some of the conversation about this with working with women who are pregnant and drinking.
Thank you, Chris. And I really appreciate all the comments that we're seeing in the chat box. And when we think about all of the professions that we have today, a variety of professionals, all of whom have issues around, not issues necessarily, but they have a responsibility for confidentiality. And I imagine some have issues, but I think the majority of us struggle with this in certain ways, perhaps, but that we hold to it to the best of our ability as professionals. Because it is that essential aspect of the provider-client relationship. And when you think about the areas that Chris just discussed, you can see where there could be challenges in that way. However, the more information we know, the better we are to provide the best care. Now, of course, just a brief, I know we're up to HIPAA for all of us, but just as a quick overview, of course, the HIPAA privacy rule provides federal protections for personal health information held by covered entities and gives patients an array of rights with respect to that information. At the same time, the privacy rule is balanced so that it permits the disclosure of personal health information needed for patient care and other important purposes. The security rules specifies a series of administrative, physical, and technical safeguards for covered entities to use to assure the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of electronic protected health information. Of course, one of the major goals of the privacy rule is to assure that individuals' health information is properly protected while allowing the flow of health information needed to provide and promote high-quality health care and to protect the public's health and well-being. The rule strikes a balance that permits important use of information while protecting the privacy of people who seek care and healing, given that the healthcare marketplace is diverse. The rule is designed to be flexible and comprehensive to cover a variety of uses and disclosures that need to be addressed. When we ponder this for a moment, of course, there are some basic principles. One being that in general, if a state law is contrary to the privacy rule, the federal law, of course, preempts that. There are some exceptions to that, and if you have the time later when you receive this information, the web link that there will help you to have more specific information. But I feel that generally we're all pretty comfortable with HIPAA. But again, it's specific to the consistency with state laws, that can vary. But again, it is preempted by federal laws. I'm going to ask a question, and I'd be very interested to see what some of you think, or as many of you that would like to make a brief comment as to some of the challenges that you find when it comes to maintaining confidentiality. What are some of the challenges that you face? I'm going to give a moment for some responses. I love the fact that multiple attendees are typing. And thank you, Mahasan, for continuing this discussion that was brought up earlier. Rachel, an interesting point, right? we are going to run into these folks in many occasions, especially if you're in areas that, I think of Chris, for instance, in North Dakota and those rural areas where you're going to be running into people. The absolute circumstance when we start thinking about, thank you, Michelle, when we start looking at, okay, involving DCFS and reporting or underreporting, your values and beliefs that may differ from the client's. Thank you, Angie. And when we think about that, I'd like to touch on that for just a second in the sense that, for example, I'm at the University of Utah, and in my state, the majority religion has an abstinence when it comes to alcohol. And so it can be challenging for an individual to admit that they drink. And when I have had those conversations with folks, there's been that concern that, well, yeah, but you could say this is such a small community. I tell you, you're going to tell someone else. And so being able to build that rapport and that trust to be able to maintain the confidentiality. Oh, Lois, thank you. Staff with personal connections to clients. Again, one of those big issues. And Karen, thank you so much. Clients will not test positive for drugs but still need to report for the concerns of DFS. Thank you. It just goes again to show that we're all dealing with issues about this, and it's not that easy. I asked a student the other day about shades of gray with ethics and confidentiality, and her response was, well, actually it's 50 shades of gray. And I thought, oh, okay. But we need to remember that how do we go about sharing this information? And we need to understand the laws when it comes to, is it possible for us to share information with family without breaching confidentiality? And you may not be able to acknowledge that you know the individual. How many times in some of your experiences have you used the, I cannot confirm or deny, specific to confidentiality of folks in treatment centers, for example. Or I remember long before seeing the HIPAA laws placed in offices, in a OBGYN office, I got a phone call from the doctor who was very concerned because he had a sign-in list, and apparently a neighbor of a friend of a neighbor saw their young daughter, probably 16 years old, name on that list and assumed that meant she was coming in because she was pregnant. So confidentiality and the issues that we deal with that seem to be never-ending, and they seem to be actually growing, and I think social media speaks to that. So we need to be able to explain what we can and cannot share with individuals. That's an important piece to remember. Additionally, talking again, the big issue with family and friends, those of you may remember in your schooling, it seems like the always example is being in the elevator and overhearing conversations that take place. That it's just such a huge issue, and we as professionals need to be able to call people out in an appropriate fashion who we know are breaching confidentiality, or we think may be, or be engaged in the trainings, etc. Oh, absolutely, Teresa. Thank you for your comment. It is a minefield out there. One of the traps we fall into unintentionally is, of course, the I'll trust and tell you, but you can't tell anyone else. Well, again, with the majority of us with our clinical backgrounds, we know exactly where that's going to lead us, and it's going to lead us into trouble. We can never promise. We need to be so clear about what we will and will not say, what our code of ethics is, what our state laws say we have to report or not report, and those differ, and we'll hear a little bit more about that in a little bit. And we need to be able to discuss touchy situations and being aware of all possible confidentiality issues. So when you think about it, and thinking within your own profession, within your own state, are there existing codes of ethics? Are you familiar with them? What are the treatment justifications? So what is the rationale that we do or don't do something? And are there other ways to do this? When we think about the decision-making specific to ethics, we need to remember who benefits. And with the topic that we're discussing, of course, the unborn child, who benefits? And then how does this problem impact individual, family, and communities? And thinking back to that first video again, so if you saw somebody doing something, how do you respond to that? And we frequently, I sit on the Institutional Review Board, no groaning please, on the Institutional Review Board here at the university, as well as the Conflict of Interest Committee meeting. And we always ask the question, all right, when we look at studies, when we look at ethics, when we look at those issues, so how would this look in the headlines? Where do we drop the ball? And what is my bias, frankly, is we fight for those who we're trying to serve and do so in an ethical fashion. So it's time for another polling question, Carolyn, if you wouldn't mind. Carolyn's so awesome. We appreciate her so much and all of her hard work to make this run so well. So the question is, are you aware of your state statutes and areas specific to fetal care prior to birth? It would appear that the majority of us are not. And I appreciate your honesty. Thank you so much, because this is something that we do need to think about. We do need to check our state statutes, and there are some great websites that will help us do that. Chris, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Ruth. You know, obviously there's lots of information out there, and looking at specific state statutes is, again, a lot of different kinds of information locally in your own state about. And so this is one particular one resource that has different kinds of FASD-related legislation by state. So that's a resource that you can use to you know, learn a little bit more about certain legislation initiatives in your own state and community. Any other ideas where you might look to for specific state resources? You can put those in the chat box if people have some ideas. Where would you go as people interested in you know, prenatal and postnatal health and alcohol-related FASD issues? I found for myself, doing some research related to kind of rural women, that a lot of it is, you know, meeting nurses. For me, is particularly good as a social worker, learning about folks most interested in maternal health kind of locally. And sometimes I have to just show up places, and sometimes the phone or email can only get me so far. I'm seeing other people talking about the Department of Health and public health nurses. The 211 care line. I used to live in Idaho, so I remember that 211 line out there. Yeah, so thinking about different resources of trying to get, and some of that might even start kind of locally with a few people, just a handful of people who may have a strong interest in that area. So I encourage you to maybe even some of these names of these other participants may be helpful in terms of linking with some people locally who share these concerns about fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. Okay, so we're going to move on to the case study, and I hope this is something that can facilitate a little bit of discussion and conversation as we think about those 4 ethical principles that I talked about, and what comes to mind, and what are the things that you're thinking about for this particular case. So we tried to make it pretty basic. This is an adaptation of a case study from a Canadian website that had a similar agenda. So this is the case of Claire. Claire is a mother of 4 and is expecting her 5th baby in a few months. She lives in an isolated community. Her common-law partner has been very abusive and has recently been put in jail. She has no one to turn to. Most of her friends are also his friends and have taken his side. And yet, in some ways, it was easier when he was home. He will buy groceries and bring in some money. Claire drinks alcohol to help her forget what is going on. Sometimes she drinks with her partner because he expects it. Other times she drinks small amounts throughout the day to take the edge off. She finds herself more easygoing with the kids when she is calmer. So before we talk a little bit about how we might think of this case with Claire, and if we had Claire in our specific office, working with her in some fashion with our own particular jobs, I'd like to show you a little bit about what many of the national healthcare organizations have come out against certain punitive approaches. So punitive approaches are obviously approaches that offer correctional aims or punishments for women who are using alcohol while pregnant. And here we have numerous advocacy groups that have issued strong concerns about punitive approaches toward women who expose their fetuses to substances such as alcohol. And that main reason is that these punitive approaches might contribute to a mistrust of healthcare providers by pregnant women who are in need of trusted care. So we think about the pregnancy period and how necessary appropriate prenatal care is and engagement with the healthcare system. And so to think that these concerns of punitive approaches, that could very well drive pregnant women away from healthcare altogether. And so that's the concern with more punitive approaches, which is kind of at odds with some of the, if you look at some of the legislation from that link, where some states might be going in terms of enacting more punitive approaches. So if we think about these 4 principles, autonomy, beneficence, non-malfeasance, and justice, if we think about the case of Claire, what kinds of case factors, as we heard about Claire, do we think about when you think about autonomy? So feel free to chat whatever comes to mind. So when you think about autonomy, self-determination, making choices by oneself, what comes to mind as you think about Claire? You read a little bit about her story with her partner going to jail. Yeah, so Kathy's pointing out that has the right to make decisions about her own life, and so in terms of making particular decisions about her own drinking. So any other comments, people thinking about autonomy of this particular ethical principle as we think about Claire? Great, so Carolyn's saying we wouldn't want some kind of intervention if we're going to be sitting down with Claire to get in the way of, victimizing her or I don't know, put words into your mouth, Carolyn, but making her feel, that she's, I don't know, that she's, yeah, said you put it well, victimize her in ways in terms of our treatment for her. So self-empowerment. What does Claire want? Jim points out, what does she want out of the situation? How does she think about her own particular drinking? So that's a big step in terms of and other webinars that our center is affiliated with talk a little bit more about things like motivational interviewing, one specific intervention that can be helpful in clarifying what that particular person's goals might be. So Rachel talking about self-empowerment. And there's Carolyn. She's got some of our things very much related to some of these approaches, particularly much of the emphasis for motivational interviewing to clarify what indeed the client in front of us might want, so in the case of Claire. Another part of autonomy is is also is she informed at all about her own drinking and how it may impact her fetus? We don't know from the case study how much she knows at this point. We don't know how much she knows about, as we saw with Ruth showing the various videos, there certainly still are different knowledge in communities about how harmful or not harmful drinking might be to the fetus. So that's an important part of that educational aspect. Rachel's saying, what are her options? So these are things that, in terms of thinking about autonomy, is she aware of different options she might have, whether it be about her specific drinking or decisions about perhaps treatment or some kind of some kind of treatment for herself or some kind of different way of using alcohol, if at all, or abstinence. Okay. So let me go to the next slide here. Okay. So as we think about the case of Claire, we can work with any number of those ethical principles and think about what are the ones that seem the most relevant for this particular case. As I was previously saying, what does she specifically know about the effects of alcohol on the fetus? And how might we evaluate her decision making? And so this becomes the difficult calls kind of ethically as we think about autonomy of how much is her drinking impairing her decision making altogether? Or could you argue that any alcohol use is, because she is pregnant, if she knows that that can have some, as we talked earlier, that there's no safe amount or no safe time, in what way does that, how does that inform her decisions about drinking alcohol? And then finally, if we think about justice, what kind of access does she have to treatment services at all? Is she insured? Is she not insured? Who would provide her with those services? If she's doesn't have, if she's screened that she doesn't have a severe level of alcohol use, how does that get her to engage with treatment? I want to look at some of these other comments that people are writing. Carolyn's talking about screening, and certainly that's a very important part of the ethical responsibility that health professionals have. And I hope this encourages you to think about more trainings in light of that. And we do some curriculum work related to screening for undergraduate and graduate social workers. Do we know if Veronica's asking if she's drinking with other children? That certainly might tell us something about her decision-making and her ability to make choices if she's drinking with other of her children. I'm trying to follow other ones here. It's good to know, Jim. She could definitely end up at your agency in Dallas. So, is she aware of some of these dangers? Royal's saying. Okay. The other part that I guess hasn't really come much up a little bit is the partner here too, and how does that? What is the role or the existence of the role or that relationship? How does that kind of factor into the decisions that she might make in terms of financial security, the social pressures? It sounds like at some level to drink with him that was raised a little bit in the case study. So that's also a contextual factor of the social relationships that certainly can affect kind of autonomy. Okay. Trying to get to the next slide here. Let's see. Okay. So I think, did anybody have any other questions or comments about that particular case study before we kind of open it up to some other questions in the chat box? Any other comments or questions about? Well, I'm glad to. I'm not glad about the case study, but I'm glad, Teresa, that you can see the realism in certain scenarios like that case study for that these are rarely kind of cut and dry issues, and they rarely have an obvious ethical answer, if you will, and that I think what that also points out is in hopefully many of the settings that you're working in, you have others to work with, right? You have others to collaborate with and talk through some of the concerns and the ethical conundrum of how do we balance her autonomy, yet also her safety, her personal safety and the safety of her pregnancy, and also that she has justice and opportunity to access, be it health care, be it treatment services if needed or necessary. Great. So Ruth's asking, and how would you consider, contacting, child family services, and at what point would that occur? And I think this is where, kind of the group kind of decision making, certainly here with providers. Also, there are state laws and certainly these personhood issues of the fetus in certain states being classified as a person. There are different language around that in each particular state, and so yeah, they are not easy answers, and this is why you need others to help through thinking about these ethical decisions and how to refer and how to pass on kind of information if that's necessary. And Carolyn, talking a little bit about stigma, I think that's an important part too of the earlier polling questions about judgment and how well can we ask open. Are we ready to hear the answers about women's alcohol use? And so I think some of the work we've done with writing curriculum is really trying to get training students to feel comfortable asking questions about alcohol, just period, starting those conversations and then having some kind of response. And we've tied that to different motivational interviewing objectives to clarify what are some goals and what is their motivation in terms of either stopping their drinking or reducing their drinking. And Marty here knows about the specific drinking related laws in Marty's particular state. Is any Ruth or Mahasan, feel free to jump in about anything you're seeing here about concerns about these ethical principles and drinking during pregnancy.
Chris, I'm wondering what everybody else thinks about Kathy's comment, specific to the ethical considerations if we know someone drank during pregnancy.
So someone who drank during pregnancy and the child has signs and symptoms, who, if anyone, is approached about the possibility of FASD? Well, the natural thought I have here, someone who would see a young child might be certainly a pediatrician or pick up on that, but the open-ended question, right, is training about that and kind of the sharing of information where we might think that's even a possible case. Here at University of North Dakota, we have one of the leading experts, Dr. Bird, in doing, I believe, doing assessments over here at the med school with FASD. But that kind of screening for FASD, I don't think is quite a specialty. My understanding is from doing some of these trainings, and so trying to find, particularly in certain locales, someone who can do that particular, get a physician to screen for that. So those are my initial reactions. But as Mahasan said earlier, the facial components is a FAS is one part of a larger umbrella where people can have many different kinds of behaviors related to their particular mother drinking during pregnancy and yet not have those facial features. So that slide that had kind of FASD and FAS, that kind of speaks to this much larger group that at least currently we're believing has this kind of spectrum disorder concept of people that both have the facial and growth features and then ones that do not.
Royal, that's a really important statement, and it's kind of when we've been talking about the ethics and then the 4 principles that Chris has talked about, because being able to ask those hard questions in a way that will encourage the conversation, at least I know the majority of the time, the first try at least, there's usual denial, right? And these patients are typically, these clients are very astute to when they're being judged, and so then how do we bridge that as soon as we can to be able to build that rapport to encourage honest dialogue.
So again, to reiterate kind of what I'm reading here is that kind of the next step in terms of at least for the 3 of us who have been involved with training social workers on our educational responsibilities of thinking about that screening is certainly an important first step, and getting people on board with screening and asking these questions openly. The question that the ethical responsibilities and today brings up is, if you ask these things openly and you get certain responses based on the laws and the laws of a particular state, depending on the answer to those screening questions, can really lead you down some different roads that you certainly might not be expecting. So as we think about, that's why a consideration of both autonomy, justice, our care for our clients, and being aware of risks are important things to consider in making these specific decisions. So Mahasan, did you want to take us through a little bit of the references here that that might be nice resources for folks to take a look at?
Sure. And also, just at one point, I want to give acknowledgement to a colleague of ours, Dan Dubowski, at the SAMHSA FASD Center for Excellence for some of his slides that we have used during this presentation. And I will just advance to the next slide here with the references and so forth. There are a number of references here and links. Feel free to take a look at these, that they should be helpful if you're interested, especially the additional website resources in terms of FASD, support training, advocacy, and resources. NIAAA has a lot of great resources and so forth. I think, too, it's important to note that, the more we can share resources, it's helpful, especially local resources. And I appreciate, Chris, how you said earlier, just being aware of even who's on the call in your area and networking. It's very important. I think there was an earlier comment, too. I just wanted to comment, and I was trying to scroll through the comments here. About in terms of the facial features that are only present at a certain time for if the mother drank from days 19 to 21. We don't have, I am not aware of that information in the research that I've seen through the CDC. So if you have that information with a reference, if you can let us know. The information that I have and that we have through the CDC is that researchers haven't gotten so specific to pinpoint the days when a mother drank what aspect of the fetus is impacted. So it's still, I think it's quite something that's still being researched. But if you do have more information and you can send it to us, please let us know. That's well researched and referenced. So I'll go ahead and turn the time back over to you, Chris.
Okay, well, I think that kind of concludes our call. It certainly seems like people have some kind of additional questions, and we can certainly look at that and answer some of those. Yeah, any
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, and Chris, I just noticed looks like there's a typo on your email address. So if folks have other questions they want to send to Ruth and I, or it looks like there's a D needed on the end of your last name there.
I think they ran out of letters in it. I think they only have a certain amount of letters, and my name's apparently really long. The other thing is, if people are trying to get a hold of me, I am changing institutions. I'll be moving to Illinois State University next year in the social work department. So certainly, you Google a name like with a bunch of J's, you'll find me somehow. But I really appreciate all your questions and comments, and I hope there's ways you can stay connected with the center here and thinking about these really important issues for healthcare professionals.
Yeah, definitely. This has just been a wonderful call. We really appreciate your participation. It's been such rich comments and important dialogue that you've brought up. It's wonderful to use a different platform in terms of we are not face-to-face, but you have really used this to a great and wonderful extent, and we appreciate that.
All right, thank you, everybody.